The Pokémon franchise has been around for a while now, and its future is looking just as bright as Rock Tunnel after a Pokémon has used Flash. We got Wind and Waves coming out soon. No, wait a minute, no, that's next year. But Pokémon Champions literally just came out, so why don't we take a look and see how it's doing? Ooh, that's not good. Why don't we put the future on hold for a bit and talk about the past, because there are a whole lot of Pokémon games I've played over the years. And that's why today we're going to have some fun by going over all of those old games and making a tier list. Just remember that these are just my opinions and they could always change at a later date. Plus, this is just for fun, so don't take it too seriously. Alright, first up we're starting with where it all began, with Pokémon Red. And yes, I actually have played a physical copy of this game on an actual Game Boy, because I'm old. What can you even say about that first generation? We all know of at least one or two different secret methods of which you could find Mew. I mean, you just had to be there. It's not a perfect game, but I've beaten it so many times that I just have to put it in the B tier. Plus, without Red, Green, and then later Blue, we wouldn't be talking about any of the other games on this list. It's gotta go in one of the higher tiers. Now, I just mentioned Green and Blue to go along with Red, but there was actually a fourth version of the Game Boy Pokémon games that had a little bit of influence from the anime series in it. And I'm talking about, of course, Pokémon Yellow. The special Pikachu edition wasn't drastically different than the other versions, but it did allow you to start the game with Pikachu, and you could get the other three starters as you progressed. The graphics for the Pokémon themselves were a major upgrade, plus they managed to find a way to work in Jessie and James from the anime. You can also do some pretty cool stuff with this starter Pikachu if you have Pokémon Stadium, but because this is basically the exact same game, I'm going to stick it in the B tier along with Red. Now, somebody at Nintendo figured out that battling Pokémon wasn't the only fun you could have with them. You could actually have a pretty good time just taking pictures of your favorite pocket monsters, which is why we have the game Pokémon Snap. 63 different Pokémon just living their best lives across 7 different courses, and all you're really doing is throwing food at them, pester balls to make them angry so that they'll do a specific pose, or play music for them so they'll dance around a bit. It wasn't very complicated, but it actually was pretty fun. Now, there is one big issue with this game. It's pretty short. It doesn't take very long to clear all of the courses, and after you've backtracked once or twice, you've seen everything those courses have. So I'm gonna put it in the C tier, but we'll say it's in the high C tier. Sure, taking pictures of Pokemon is fun, but let's face it, the battles are where it's at. So we have to have a Nintendo 64 game that features the battles, and that's exactly what we got with Pokémon Stadium. Now, the cool part about this game is that you could link up your Game Boy games through a special connector piece with the N64 controllers, and you could use your Game Boy Pokemon on Pokémon Stadium. This game did offer rental Pokemon that you could use in the event that you didn't have any Game Boy games to pull from, but those were usually weaker than the ones you raise yourself, so even the official guides for Pokémon Stadium recommended picking up Yellow, Red, Blue, or Green. Stadium mode, Gym Leader Castle, a bunch of fun mini-games, and a final battle where you pit your entire team against one Mewtwo. This game holds a special place in my heart, so I've gotta stick it in the A tier. Now, the N64 existed at a point where the Pokemon anime was at its peak, and so we actually did get a video game that was inspired directly from the anime, in the form of Pokemon Puzzle League. This time, your Pokemon aren't trying to knock each other out with a bunch of special attacks. Nope, all you gotta do is clear some colorful blocks. But it's not as easy as it sounds. If you want to be good at this game, you've gotta be quick, because one wrong move and it'll cost you the entire round. It's not a traditional Pokemon game, but there were some intense battles to be had for sure. I'm gonna stick this one in the A tier. Now ask yourself this, have you ever wondered what it would be like to talk directly to a Pokemon? Well, Nintendo figured you might, and if you had a Nintendo 64 and a copy of Hey You Pikachu, you got to do just that. This is a wacky one for sure. I mean, who sat down and thought, you know what, let's attach a microphone to this controller so that people can talk to this little electric rat. I can't say I didn't have fun with it though. There were times where Pikachu wouldn't listen to you or would do the exact opposite of what you told it to do, but usually that just resulted in something funny happening, so I generally always let it slide. This one's kind of hard to grade because the main gameplay feature was just your voice, and you had to hope that Pikachu understood what you were saying. So I think it's best to put this one in the middle tier C, because I don't really know where else it would fit. At this point in the 90s, everybody was into Pokemon in some way, so naturally they had to make a sequel series in the form of the Game Boy Color games, Gold, Crystal, and my personal favorite, Silver. Gen 2 felt like a proper sequel. Everything felt a little bit bigger, a little bit more advanced, and it just felt so good when you cleared the Johto section of the game and got into the Kanto region again. And this one's really special to me because I remember the Christmas morning where I got my very own Game Boy Color and a copy of Pokemon Silver. Starting that generation was just something so special to me, and I think I'll always remember it. 100 new Pokemon, special Pokeballs, and a day and night feature, all leading up to an epic final confrontation with Pokemon Trainer Red from the Generation 1 games. This is probably one of my favorite editions of the main series ever. A tier for sure. Now, we actually did get another Pokemon puzzle game, but it was for the Game Boy Color, and it was called Pokemon Puzzle Challenge. While the N64 game was based off of the anime, this one was actually based off of the Gold and Silver games, and it was a much more tame version of it. There's not really a whole lot to say about Pokemon Puzzle Challenge, it's just a much more basic version of Pokemon Puzzle League, so I'm sticking it in the C tier. Now, unfortunately, Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal were not compatible with Pokemon Stadium, but that wouldn't be a problem for very long because we ended up getting Pokemon Stadium 2. This is exactly what it sounds like, a new version of Pokemon Stadium for the new generation. But this time they even threw in the Trainers Academy, which allows you to go in and learn things about the Pokemon games, and you can even have a little quiz battle against your friends, which is pretty fun too. Pokemon Stadium 2 is Pokemon Stadium with more stuff, so I feel like this one has to go in the A tier because that's where the original is. Now we're moving into the Game Boy Advance era, and we're going to start off with not a new version of the series, but with an updated version of a game that I never played, Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire. Having never played the original Pokemon Pinball, I didn't really know what to expect, but it's a pretty fun pinball game, and since it's Pokemon themed, that takes things up another notch. The boss battles can be a bit of a headache, but I still think this is a pretty solid video pinball game, so I think it belongs in the B tier. Now let's get into Gen 3 proper with the release of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. One thing I'll always remember about this game is that this generation gave us a lot of new faces for the Dragon type, because Gen 1 only had Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite, and Gen 2 just gave us Kingdra. Not to mention the increase of the number of legendary Pokemon you could find. This game wanted to keep you busy. I had a Game Boy Advance SP, which actually came with a built-in backlight, so it made playing these games a lot easier, and Ruby just is pretty special to me. I'm sticking it in the B tier. Up next, we get the start of a tradition that would carry over for quite some time in the first set of Pokemon remakes with Pokemon Fire Red. You could choose between this or Leaf Green, and because I always preferred Red, I wanted to go with Fire Red for the remake, and it's the same game with some upgrades to it, so yeah, it's still pretty good. I don't know why, but I never really connected with this version of the game. Even though I know that it's basically just an updated version of Red, I still preferred playing Ruby most of the time. For some reason, it just had a better vibe to me. So I think I'm gonna stick Fire Red in the C tier. With the arrival of the GameCube, we ended up getting a Pokemon game that none of us were expecting, an actual traditional Pokemon-style game, but in a 3D world. This is Pokemon Colosseum. In Colosseum, you actually play as a former member of the bad guys team, and they're going around stealing Pokemon to close their hearts off and turn them into Shadow Pokemon, which is this game's main gimmick. This seemed like a pretty big deal at the time. It played mostly like a traditional Pokemon game, but it also felt like it was something different too. Now there is one big catch though, pun intended. You can't really catch that many Pokemon in the game. Despite that though, this is a lot of fun, and seeing some of the newer, bigger Pokemon at the time like Groudon and Wailord in full 3D is still pretty mind-blowing. I'm sticking this one in the A tier. Now let's say you've played the Game Boy Advance games and you've played Pokemon Colosseum, but you're still struggling to catch Lugia. What's a Pokemon trainer to do? Well, you just run to the store and pick up a copy of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. This game is set in the same region, and again, you're capturing Shadow Pokemon, although they did work in a Wild Pokemon feature, so there is a little bit of something different here. But of course the main focus here is the Shadow Lugia, which takes on a unique form that you can only find in this game. Now to be honest, even though this is supposed to be a sequel, there's not a whole lot of differences in the story between Pokemon Colosseum and Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Shadow Lugia is cool, and I do think this game has the better selection of Pokemon you can catch, but honestly, it just feels more like a retread, so I'm putting this one in the B tier. Now, there was one other Pokemon GameCube game that I played that's very different from Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness, and is actually more of a sequel to Hey You Pikachu. This is Pokemon Channel. Now, in this game, you don't talk to Pikachu. Your main objective is to watch TV with it. No, I'm not kidding. Somebody actually pitched a video game where all you do really is just watch TV with a Pikachu, and they decided to make it. So don't even think about how silly your game idea is. If this got greenlit, anything can. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it for what it was, but we gotta be honest here. There's not a whole lot of anything interesting happening in Pokemon Channel. It's got to go to the D tier. Now we move to the DS with Generation 4 and Pokemon Diamond. The theme of this season was Ultimate. They really wanted these to feel like the biggest Pokemon games of all time. They even went so far as to give us the Alpha Pokemon Arceus, which is said to, according to legends, have created the entire Pokemon universe. This game was cool, but it's another situation where I feel like I didn't really connect with the game, so I'm sticking it in the C tier even though I enjoyed it. I felt like Diamond was just missing something, like it needed something extra to put it over the top for me, and I ended up getting exactly what I wanted with Pokemon Platinum. If you've heard me talk about some of my favorite Pokemon in the past, then you'll know that Giratina is one of my favorite Pokemon designs ever, specifically its origin form. This is exactly what Diamond and Pearl was missing. The entire adventure into the Distortion world to face off against the lone resident of that realm, origin form Giratina, was so special and unique. I wish we could get it again, but unfortunately when they did Pokemon Legends Arceus, which we'll talk about later, we didn't get to see the Distortion world a second time. Can't really add much. This is one of my favorite Pokemon main series games to play. I've got to stick Platinum in the A tier. With Fire Red and Leaf Green, people were already anticipating potential remakes for Gold and Silver, which we ended up getting in the form of Heart Gold and my favorite, Soul Silver. This was everything I had hoped a remake of Silver would be. They improved everything that needed improving, they gave Lugia more importance in the story, and they added a whole bunch of extra stuff that just filled the game out, and they even made you want to go and revisit Kanto again because in the original version, it was pretty empty. I have nothing else to add to this. Soul Silver is going straight to the A tier. Now we move on to the Wii, and everybody was wondering if we might get Pokemon Stadium 3, or if the next big Pokemon console game would be more like Colosseum or Gale of Darkness. But we didn't get those, we got Pokemon Battle Revolution. Here you could actually customize your character for the very first time, and you were offered a limited number of rental Pokemon with battle cards that you could use if you didn't have any of the DS games. But the big feature of this game was definitely the online battles, and man, they were a lot of fun. Heart Gold and Soul Silver were not compatible with this game, and although Platinum was, there was no data in the game for Origin Form Giratina, even though it retained all of its stats and abilities. I do wish they had included some mini-games or an actual story mode or something like that, but you know what, it's fine. The online battles were fun enough, I'm sticking it in the B tier. Now let's just say you've been collecting Pokemon on all of the Game Boy Advance games and all of the DS games. You've probably got a pretty sizable collection going on. What happens if you actually run out of room? Well, you can make yourself some new room with My Pokemon Ranch. This is less of a game and more of just extra storage for all of the Pokemon that you capture, but you do get a few free rewards if you store a certain number of Pokemon. The ranch will give you a free Mew at a certain point, but that's about it. There's not really much to this game, as I've said, so I feel like I have to put this one in the D tier, just because there's not a whole lot to do. Now, as the Nintendo 3DS was starting to take off, Game Freak decided to hold off on jumping to the new hardware, so on the plain old-fashioned DS, we got Pokemon Black and White. This time it was a clean slate. You wouldn't see any of the previous Pokemon until the post-game, and it really did feel like they were trying to freshen things up a bit. Gen 5 gave us triple battles and rotation battles, something that did not carry on to Gen 6, which I think kind of sums up how I feel about Pokemon Black and White. I feel like it should go in the C tier because I didn't hate this generation, but I just don't feel that strong about it either. So here would be where we discuss Pokemon Gray, right? The third version remake of Black and White. But no, we didn't get that. Instead, we got actual direct sequels in the form of Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Now, call me weird, but I picked Pokemon Black because I was a big fan of the design for Reshiram over Zekrom. So when it came time to choose between White 2 and Black 2, I went with White 2 because that one had White Kyurem on it. Yes, I know that I should have picked Black 2 to properly follow the story. You don't have to explain that to me. Now, these games did have some interesting bonus features, like the tournament mode where you could battle gym leaders and champions from previous games. Black 2 and White 2 are definitely improvements over the originals, but I'm gonna go ahead and stick it in the C tier because I think it just barely misses out B tier. So now you would expect the next move would be for the main series to jump fully into the 3DS, but we're not quite there yet. No, we actually got Pokémon Dream Radar. So what is this game? Well, it's a very strange type of game where you can capture a few dream Pokemon that show up in the form of various legendaries that may have been harder to come across in the DS games. But the real reason to get this would be so you can get the new Therian forms of Tornadus, Landorus, and Thunderos. This one was pretty simple and straight to the point. It did what it was supposed to do, but I think overall it's pretty forgettable, so I'm sticking it in the D tier. Up next, we finally get to move to the 3DS properly with the release of Pokémon X and Y. Seeing the main series Pokemon games move completely away from 2D sprites to full 3D models was kind of jarring at the time, but I didn't mind it that much. They actually introduced a new battle style for this game called Sky Battle, in which only flying Pokemon and Pokemon with Levitate could take part in. It was kind of weird, and they never used this again, so that was certainly something. I think there was some interesting stuff in X and Y, however, because we never got a Pokemon Z or any sort of follow-up or sequel, it felt like things were unfinished, so I'm sticking Pokemon Y in the C tier. It's remake time again, and this time we're going back to Hoenn, and as much as I love Soul Silver, I think that they did an even better job with these games. This is Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In this game, Kyogre and Groudon have primal reversion forms, which sort of function like Mega Evolutions, except you can't choose when they activate, they just activate on their own. But they're also not considered Mega Evolutions, so you can use them alongside a Mega Evolution of your choice. I don't know what the purpose of that was lore-wise, but you could build some pretty powerful teams with that combination. Not to mention the Delta episode, which focused on Rayquaza and even included a bonus battle against Deoxys, which was the first time that Deoxys had been available outside of events. They did a phenomenal job with these remakes. I'm sticking this one up in the A tier. Like the previous hardware, the 3DS also saw two different generations of Pokemon, this time followed up with Sun and Moon. I actually really enjoyed Alola. They sort of broke the traditions by not having gym leaders and instead having island challenges and totem Pokemon that you could go and fight. Not to mention how much I loved the Ultra Beast gimmick. I thought at first they were introducing a brand new type of life form into the series that weren't actually Pokemon, but no, they are just strange Pokemon from another reality. And the final boss battle against Lusamine, where she's taken over by one of the Ultra Beasts she's been chasing, is probably one of the coolest boss battles in all of Pokemon. I've gotta put this one in the A tier. Now this time Game Freak changed things up again. Instead of giving us a single third version or two sequels, they sort of combined those two concepts and provided us with Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, retellings of the previous games. This time the focus is on Necrozma and its ability to absorb either Solgaleo or Lunala. This transforms it into a form that very closely resembles the Pokemon it has absorbed. However, it also allows it to transform again into a Mega Evolution or Primal Reversion style form referred to as Ultra Necrozma. This thing is one of the strongest Pokemon boss battles ever in a game, and it's a really cool form because it's sort of unique in that it's not a Mega Evolution and it's not a Primal Reversion. However, I do feel like I prefer the way the story played out in the original game, so I think I've got to stick this one in the B tier. Next comes a pretty big jump for the Pokemon games, moving to the Nintendo Switch, the first time the Pokemon main series has appeared on an actual home Nintendo console. However, you can play the Switch in handheld mode, so the mobile aspect of Pokemon remains intact even to this day. Galar was an interesting region, and it's here that you really start to see them experimenting with exactly what role the gym leaders play in the lore. However, this is also where they decided that they weren't going to be putting every Pokemon in the games going forward, and I thought it was kind of a strange choice to completely remove Mega Evolution and Z moves in place of Dynamaxing. The Wild area gave us our first taste of an open world style Pokemon game, but I still think that everything else in this was sort of average, but it was fun. I'm going to stick it in the C tier. Now, a sequel to Pokemon Snap had sort of been on everybody's wish list for a long time, but most of us had assumed we would never see one. But luckily we did, in the form of the appropriately named new Pokemon Snap. Luckily, they did exactly what I was hoping they would do for a game like this. They added more levels, you could choose between night and day, there were alternate routes on each course you could choose to go through, and as you leveled up through the courses, you would see more Pokemon or different Pokemon start to show up. They brought back Pokemon Snap the right way, and while I am putting it in the C tier, I do consider it a big improvement over the original. Next, we have a taste of something a little bit different, where Game Freak is really trying to experiment with the types of Pokemon games they're releasing, and I think we got something special with this one, Pokemon Legends Arceus. We're back in the Sinnoh region for this one, though in this particular time it's referred to as the Hisui region, and Sinnoh is the name of the Pokemon god that the people here worship. It's actually kind of interesting that they made a Pokemon game where it's sort of like dueling religions, because the Diamond Clan and the Pearl Clan both believe in the almighty Sinnoh, but their versions of the almighty Sinnoh are pretty different. And we end up finding out that the almighty Sinnoh in the eyes of the Diamond Clan turns out to be Dialga, while for the Pearl Clan it's Palkia. But it turns out the events of this entire game are set up by the alpha Pokemon itself, Arceus, who actually tells us that Arceus is not its actual name, that's just what the humans refer to it as. And Arceus, as we see it as a Pokemon, is just the form it takes so that humans can comprehend its existence. So there's no telling what exactly this thing's true form really is. And we probably will never see it. Exploring Hisui is a lot of fun, and I actually think that the changes to the battle system should have been carried over to the main series to keep things more fresh. I labeled the A tier as Arceus-like, so I feel like it's just meant to be that Pokemon Legends Arceus goes to the A tier. Now, MOBA games are pretty popular these days, and it was probably inevitable that Pokemon would dip their toes into this genre as well, and that's exactly what we saw with the release of Pokemon Unite. Now, I had never played a MOBA game before, so I was really interested in trying this out because it was themed on Pokemon, and I had a pretty good time with it. I wasn't really blown away by the gameplay, but it was pretty basic and the matches didn't last too long. But there is one thing that really annoys me about this game. It has a battle pass, and it sucks. I thought that the Kicks feature for Fortnite was a big ripoff. This game gives you socks. The gameplay is perfectly fine, but that battle pass has to be the worst of any game I've ever seen. Plus, this game can only really pull me back in for a little while at a time, so I think it has to go in the C tier. Now it's time to dive into Paldea and Area Zero with the release of the most recent of the Pokemon generational games, Scarlet and Violet. This was the first true open-world Pokemon game, and boy did they let you know that in all of the commercials and promos. You always heard open-world Pokemon, but I think in all of that promotional stuff, they forgot to actually make the open world interesting. Paldea is very big, and there are a lot of Pokemon running around that region, but I feel like there's just not a lot of interesting places to explore there. Much like how The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild abandoned traditional dungeons in exchange for a massive overworld, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did the same. However, I feel like Paldea just was not as interesting as the new Hyrule was. But there are some positives here though. The mystery around Area Zero and the Paradox Pokemon is probably the coolest thing this series has ever done. I hate how it all ended up being kind of lackluster, especially with the way the Indigo Disc DLC wrapped up, but you know what? The build-up was very good, and although it didn't stick the landing, I loved every minute of it. I hope whenever we do go back to the Paldea region in some future game, they'll be able to expand upon the concept of Area Zero some more, but you know what? All of the other stuff aside, I have to put this one in the B tier because I really enjoyed it. And last but not least is a game that I think I'm about halfway through with. I've beaten the main storyline and now just have to get into the post-game. I'm talking about Pokemon Legends ZA. This game is set entirely in Lumio City, which is kind of different. Instead of having an entire region to run around, it's just this one location. What's interesting with this game is that it's actually a sequel to X and Y, taking place 5 years after the events of those games. A few familiar characters return, some older than they used to be, and there are quite a few number of new Mega Evolutions to boot. While I do think that the storyline is kind of interesting, I feel like it doesn't measure up to the original Pokemon Legends Arceus game. And I do feel a bit bad trying to rank this game when I haven't finished it yet, but from what I've seen so far, it has left me wanting a little bit more out of it, so I think maybe the C tier is the best place for it, at least until I can finish the game. Now, I was just about to wrap up this video when I remembered there's actually one more Pokemon game that I've played, and I had completely forgotten about it. Pokemon Go. I gotta tell you, I have never seen a release for a game like this where so many people were playing that you could just go and drive into town and you would see people walking everywhere trying to catch Pokemon on their phones. People have actually characterized the release of Pokemon Go as the closest thing to world peace humanity has ever been. I'll admit, when it first came out, I was a big fan, but I quickly lost interest in it because I just didn't care to walk that many places. So I'm gonna put this one in the D tier. It's good for what it's supposed to be, I guess, but it's just not for me. And there you have it. That's my tier list of all of the Pokemon games I've ever played. Do you agree with my tier list, or do you think that I got these just completely wrong? Let me know in the comments how you would rank these games. Thanks for watching this video, I really appreciate it. If you want to support my channel, then be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Now, I'm gonna go give Pokemon Sleep a try. Am I winning yet?
Oyster.